Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Becky Ruppert. I'm one of the nurses in radiation oncology at Salem Health, and I want to talk with you today about a topic that a lot of people would much prefer not to talk about. We're going to title it Ready or Not: Planning for Your Final Wishes. This all started for me back in October of last year. My mother fell, broke her hip, and ultimately passed away. And I remember thinking at the time how grateful I was that she had the foresight to put her funeral plan together. And when it came time to meet with the funeral director, I was able to sit down and look at all of her planning and all of her wishes. And she had done this back in 2005. So you can imagine that there had been some changes that needed to be made, all the while honoring her wishes. But it was so wonderful to be able to sit with him and talk with him about what I knew my mother had wanted. And because of that, I was able to incorporate all of her wishes, all of her desires into her funeral plan. And because I knew that, I was able to write her obituary. I was able to arrange the church, the organist, everything that needs to happen. And it seemed to just flow with such ease because we had talked about it and I knew what she wanted. And so it all came together. And I can tell you that as a nurse, I've worked with many families who are sitting at the bedside of a loved one who's dying. And they're talking and saying, I don't know what she wanted. I don't know. Do you know? Does she want to be cremated? Does she want a burial? What kind of flowers? Does she want music? What kind of music? What were her favorite colors? I don't know. And so there's the agony of the death and the passing, but there's the additional agony of trying to sort out what did they want? How can I make their final wishes a reality? How can I accomplish this final gift to them? And so it became important to me after this that I do something along the lines of this video to reach out and get you to think about having this conversation, because it is a vital conversation for all of us. It doesn't matter what age we are. It doesn't matter where we are in our lives. We need to have this conversation. I cannot emphasize that strongly enough. It's uncomfortable, but if you think about doing it in a loving way and a respectful way and honoring someone, it makes the conversation much easier. So as we go through this, it's my hope that you will learn why pre-planning is so important, that you'll learn several elements of pre-planning, and you'll be able to compile a final wish list for the person. Why is final wish planning so important? This is your voice. It is your mother's voice. It is your father's voice. It is your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, perhaps your child. It is their voice, your voice. Their wishes, your wishes. Talking about it, it gives you peace of mind. It makes you feel like you're doing something. You're taking control out of an out of control situation. And it ultimately takes the burden off of the friends and family, all the while honoring the person who is dying or is deceased. Who's available to help you? Well, I hope that this video will help you, but the funeral directors are an incredible source of information. Your primary care provider, your pastor or your spiritual director, your rabbi, your minister, your priest. Life insurance companies have this information. There are elder law attorneys out there who do a fabulous job. There are online resources under Final Wishes, and for those of you who are in Oregon and you may wish to donate your body, the Oregon Health Sciences University has a body donation program, and they have some very helpful information. Of course, there are forms that you're going to need to fill out. Have those ahead of time so you know what to expect, but the program can be a huge help to you. Where do you start? Obviously, a will. You need an advance directive. Do they want to be an organ donor? Do you want to be an organ donor? You need a POLST form, which is a physician's guide to what you want at end of life. Do you want CPR? Do you want a limited amount of CPR or intubation? Do you want artificial nutrition, say through an IV or a feeding tube? Do you want antibiotics? Do you want comfort care? All of those things are going to give you your voice. A healthcare power of attorney can be extremely helpful, and I'll give you an example, and I'll use myself as an example. In Oregon, it's just me and my dad. The rest of the family is on the East Coast. So in order to make my dad's life easier, if I should pass before he does, I have a healthcare power of attorney. He is my healthcare power of attorney, and I have made it very clear what I want and to what extent I want it. It's very detailed. But you have to think about these things, because if you are a small family, if your family's far flung across the states, across the country, you may be more on your own than you may actually want. And so as much of this as you can get done ahead of time, the better you're going to be. Once you have these forms, take them to your local hospital, to the medical records department, and ask that they be scanned into the computer so that no matter where you or your family member may land in the hospital, those documents are going to be available to the providers. And make sure that your primary care physician has a copy of those wishes. Challenging if you don't have a family member. But do you have a trusted friend that you could ask for help? Pre-arrange as much as possible and be very specific. Should you get death certificates? Yes, you should. Your funeral director is going to ask you, how many death certificates do you need? You're definitely going to need one for Social Security, and it's at this point in time, it's not going to be the long form, it's going to be the short form. But you're definitely going to want to keep a copy for yourself. You're probably going to need one for the primary care. If the person has their name on a title, say the title to your car or the registration to your vehicle, you're going to need to present that death certificate when you sell the vehicle. When you take it to a dealership, they're definitely going to want to have a copy of that. So give a copy to your primary care, your attorney, the insurance policies, the accounts. If you have that person listed as a beneficiary, you're going to need to make sure that that company holding your policy gets a copy of that certificate. Where are your documents going to be? Are they going to be in a safety deposit box? Are they going to be in a lock box at home? Figure out where you're going to put these documents, and if you can, organize them in a notebook so that it's one-stop shopping. You've got every single document that you could possibly need right there. If there's family cross-country, are there any family members that you would want to come with you? Now, in my own personal situation, since it's just my dad, if I should predecease my dad, who's 90 at the time of this filming, he is not going to be able to do much of anything. And so in my funeral planning, I've put an additional amount of money for a family member, airfare to fly a family member out from West Virginia to be with him, to help him at this time. I've also asked that the funeral director pick him up on the way to the church, on the way to the cemetery, bring him home. That's the kind of detail that I'm talking about when you're putting a funeral plan together. There's no such thing as too much detail. Do you have a pet? Let's not forget the pets. What provisions have you made for the pets? You're going to need to provide those directions as well to the veterinarian. If you're alone with an elderly patient, think about the resources that you have around you. Not only the resources around you in your immediate area, but also your family and your church and your friends. When should you start this process? As with any process in planning, it pays to do things when you're calm, collected, you have time to really think, you have time to invest, you have time to really get on paper everything that you want done. And you will hear, oh, I'm young, I got plenty of time. We all hope that's the case, but life is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. So if you're young but you have a family starting, be sure that you get this process going and don't wait. Where do you have the documents? Life insurance policies, including the name, address, and telephone number of the company, the insurance agent, and the policy number. A list of relatives and friends and other people who you want notified of the death. Any desires that you have. If you're leaving young children, what do you want for their education, for their upbringing? What do you want for the best for your children? And again, your pets. What should you do with your pets? Also, you want to make people aware of any prepaid services that you have. So if you are prepaying in like a burial trust, a funeral trust, anyone who is left and is going to be really directing this process for you needs access to those documents. And so in my case, I put a packet together and I sent it to my uncle back in West Virginia with a copy to one of his sons, so that it would not all fall on my dad, that there would be that backup available. So people who need to know have that information and can jump in and help with that. In order for documents to be used, they have to be in a place where they can be found easily. And one thing that I discovered, if you have it in a lockbox, a security box at a bank, once the bank finds out about the death, if the deceased's name is on that box, they will seal the box and you will not be able to get into it. And it may take a court order to get that done. So with everything else that you're putting together, be sure that you pay attention to that little bit of information. Will the plans be followed? That's the goal. That's the goal of all of this documentation. Write out your funeral plans apart from your will. This is going to include what kind of service you want. Do you want a church service? Do you want a celebration of life? Do you want a graveside service? Do you need a military service? If you do need a military service or want a military service, is there a veterans hall in your area that can accommodate that for you? And your funeral director is going to be your best source of information. If it is concerning a veteran, you're going to need your discharge paper. So when you're putting the packet together, you're actually going to have to put your veteran's discharge paper. It's a DD, and I'm blanking, frankly, on the rest of it. But any veteran is going to know what I'm talking about. That piece of paper needs to show your honorable discharge from your military service. And that piece of information needs to be put in with that packet. Tell your family and share copies of your funeral plan with them. They may say, ooh, ick, I don't want to talk about that. That's just too depressing. It needs to be talked about, so out of respect for you, they can follow your wishes. And so couching these discussions in the love you have, the respect that you have, an overwhelming desire to do what they want makes this discussion easier. And if you have some of this basic information in front of you, it can make the process go so much faster. If you can, pay for your funeral arrangements ahead of time. No surprises. Create the advance directive. We talked about the advance directive, the post form, the will, the living will, the healthcare power of attorney, the durable power. Get all of that out on the table when you're having this discussion. And know that it's probably going to take several discussions, depending on the volume of work that you have to do. Plan ahead. Get a cost estimate of what the funeral is going to be. Is it in keeping with what the deceased is going to want? Specify the details of your service or of their service. Where do they want it? Who do they want presiding? Is it going to be church? Is it going to be a synagogue? Is it going to be graveside? Is it going to be out by a stream? Again, how do they want to be buried? Do they want cremation? Do they want burial? What kind of flowers do they want? How many flowers do they want? What color of flowers do they want? What do they want to wear if they are going with a traditional burial? What is meaningful to them? I'll give you an example. Many Catholic people like to be buried with their rosary in hand, that they have prayed the rosary on their entire life. It is very meaningful for them. A lot of veterans want to be buried in their uniform as much as possible. They want their dog tags with them. They want any medals that they may have earned. Those are the kinds of things that you really need to think about and that you really need to specify. Organizing and documenting. I can't say that enough. Making sure every detail is talked about and agreed upon, and then where are those documents? Sample of funeral directions. If you want this, please call me. My number is 503-814-0455. I would be happy to share this with you. Types of specificity we've touched on a little bit, but just to kind of recap that, who needs to know? Who, what, where, when, and to what extent do you want this? What are all of the peripheral things that you may want? And I'll give you a great example of this. In planning my mother's funeral, I was sitting with the funeral director, and he asked me, do you want a thumbie? And I kind of, what thumbie? What's a thumbie? Well, a thumbie is a fingerprint of the deceased on a medal. And they can imprint that fingerprint on silver, gold, whatever, and you wear it as a necklace, or you put it on a keychain. It's a remembrance of that deceased loved one. Ashes. They can take a portion of the ashes and turn it into a beautiful piece of artwork. For people, that can be incredibly important. Burial. What do they want? Do they want a basket casket? Do they want a green funeral? Do they want a wooden casket? Do they want a metal casket? What kind of urn do they want? And what are their favorite colors? Would they want a very feminine funeral? Would they want a very masculine funeral? Did they have a particular, NFL team that they were especially fond of? Would they want something in remembrance of those things? What is specifically important to that person? Again, do they want a burial at sea? If they're going to be cremated, you can still have a burial at sea, not merely a sprinkling of the ashes, but they do have some lovely urns that are made of sea salt that the ashes go in. They close. They're quite lovely. In the ceremony, they are blessed, and they are tossed overboard into the ocean. Now, these will dissolve in a period of time, but all of that is to say, this is about what the deceased wants and honoring that request. So there are huge varieties available to you. Communication. You can either write down your wishes or make a video. That's a good way as well. Again, copies need to go to everyone who needs to know this. What about an obituary? Now, one thing that I discovered in my mother's service, meeting with the funeral director, that my parents lived in Albany, Oregon for decades. And so the Albany paper, the Albany Democrat Herald, charges $250 to put an obituary in. Much to my surprise, the Statesman Journal charges $800. The Oregonian charges $1,200. Now, we have people back, we have family on the East Coast, and so I'm thinking, before I knew this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I probably should put something in the New York Times because we have family up there. Well, looking at these costs, I'm thinking the Oregonian is $1,200. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, to put it in the New York Times, I would have to declare bankruptcy. So get the costs of the funeral and the obituary before you commit. Now, I will tell you that most funeral homes have web pages, and they very kindly, as part of the funeral service, they very kindly will put the person's obituary on their website. And so all you have to do is direct people to that website. They do a lovely job with that, and people can write messages of condolence and messages of support, and that's all included with the cost of the funeral. Help with an obituary. There are online templates that are available. Above all, write it from your heart. What do you want people to know about the deceased? In my case, with my mom, I had a picture of her when she was 19 years old. She passed away at age 87. I wrote from the perspective of a daughter who wanted the community to know what a wonderful woman she was. I wrote about her history, her marriage, her career, the things she loved. But in the middle of this obituary, I wrote a letter to her. And I started it, "Dear Mom, I want you to know how special you've been to me. I want you to know that you taught me about giving, you taught me about loving, you taught me about forgiveness. You taught me what it was to be responsible. You taught me what it was to care for others. You taught me about faith, about the importance of living a life well spent. And I can never thank you enough for the things that you taught me." So embedded in that obituary, it's perfectly fine for you to write a letter. What this person actually meant to you, what they did for you throughout their life. Again, decedent's full name as you would like it to be published, date of birth, place of birth, date of death, a photo that can be uploaded from your computer. Most funeral homes prefer that you send this to them on their email. The funeral date and time, the name and address where the service is going to be held, having a church service, and then perhaps private committal, private interment following the service. What would you like? What would they like as far as, do they want flowers or do they want donations to a specific organization? Now, to kind of help you get going, years ago I stumbled across the Dash poem, and I thought this was wonderful. Now, if you think, close your eyes for a moment and think about the tombstone, the headstone. It has their name, it has their date of birth, and it has their date of death, but in between that it has the dash. And so you have to think about, In between that date of birth and date of death, for many people, there's a lot that's happened during that dash. And what do you want people reading that obituary to know about? And I've included a little bit of this dash poem, but it was written by Linda Ellis. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of her birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that she spent alive on earth, and now only those who love her know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spent our dash. I love that. It can be tremendously encouraging when you're trying to put an obituary together. Think about that person's dash, all the things they did, all the contributions that they gave, what they loved, what they learned, and what they wanted people to know about them. And the rest of this dash poem is available. If you Google dash poem by Linda Ellis, you'll be able to pull it up in its entirety. It's quite lovely. A simple obituary, the name, date of birth, date of death, family, where they lived, what was special to them, their work, their volunteering, their hobbies, their joys, their faith, their contribution, and again, you may think about including a letter to the deceased, and then the service information. Again, do they want flowers? Do they want donations? Both. What really is their preference? You have the power to make your final wishes known. So if you leave this presentation with nothing else, please don't wait. It can be a difficult conversation to have, but it is one well worth having. Take the time, invest in yourself, invest in those who are special to you. Get down on paper what your wishes are. Be as specific as you can. Make sure everybody who needs to know does know. Prepay as much as you can. And please, as you're going through this, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to call me. My office number here at the hospital is 503-814-0455. Again, I'm Becky Ruppert. I hope that when you close this presentation, you leave with some gems that you can incorporate into your own life. And I hope, above all, that you found this helpful. Thank you so much and take good care.